Good afternoon. So I'm joined by my Conservative colleagues that work with me on the Standing Committee for Citizenship and Immigration. And today we heard some pretty, I would say, shocking testimony from the Immigration Refugee Board, as well as the Canadian Border Services Agency and the Department of Immigration. In light of some of the considerable atrocities that we've seen committed by the Iranian regime, we now have a lot of concerns about the government's capacity to detect members of the Iranian regime entering Canada, as well as to remove them. We've seen many stories over the last several months. In fact, there was just one, I believe it was today, saying that the government has only managed to deport one regime official, in spite of knowing that there are likely several hundred in the country. So my colleagues are going to speak to some of the testimony that we heard today, as well as the impact that it has on the community. But the key thing that we wanted to put forward today is that we just gave notice of a considerable and substantive motion at the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration in light of the testimony that we heard. So again, some of the things that we heard today, the government confirmed that officials have been found living in Canada. Some have made asylum claims. And while Liberal appointees at the Immigration Refugee Board, low enforcement capacity and failures to update the law mean that these individuals are both choosing Canada as a destination and avoiding deportation once here. At the same time, when Canadians of Iranian heritage have grave concerns about the government's ability to keep them safe from foreign interference, Liberals must take immediate action to prevent agents of the Islamic Republic from entering Canada and deporting those who have already arrived. That's why the Conservatives have given notice at the Immigration Committee calling on the government to urgently enforce deportation orders for non-citizen regime officials, review and update the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act to clearly ensure that non-citizens are deemed inadmissible if involved in regime-linked businesses, spreading propaganda or human rights abuses, extending inadmissibility to immediate non-citizen family members of regime officials, creating an exemption from non-refoulement protections for inadmissible non-citizen regime officials proven to have been complicit in human rights abuses, to release the name of the alleged non-citizen regime official mentioned in the February 6, 2026 Global News article, which talked about the fact that the IRB did decide to grant a secret closed-door hearing and withhold his name or their name from the public, and explain in writing to the committee why it prohibited the media from publishing this name. Table report to Parliament explaining why it has not publicly disclosed the identity of known non-citizen Iranian regime officials or agents in Canada, and to stop approving any refugee claims from countries with governments hostile to Canada unless an in-person interview is conducted first. And on that point, I'm going to toss the mic over to my colleague Brad Redekopp, who asked a lot of questions to officials about the so-called file review system for asylum claims.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, today we had the Immigration Refugee Board at committee, and we asked many questions about this file review process. This is the process by which an asylum claimant in Canada can be approved by the IRB without actually having a hearing. And we feel that we're very concerned about this because it opens up a way for an asylum claimant to enter our country without being properly vetted, without being properly looked at. And so we asked many questions about this. The answers we got were very disappointing, ranging from I don't know to just not wanting to answer the question, particularly what countries does the IRB consider that they will not do a review from, and there was no answer to that. Even though we had a list of countries from 2019, we were unable to even ascertain if such a list exists, which it probably does. So that was a very disappointing thing. Conservatives will always continue fighting for this. We're very concerned about the integrity of our country, especially with what's going on in Iran. We don't want IRGC officials to be able to enter our country without us knowing, or have their family members enter our country. And so this is something that we are going to continue pushing the government on to make sure that we understand and have a robust process in our country to ensure that we allow the right people to stay here and we do not allow the wrong people to stay here. Thank you.
Our colleague Fred Davies has also raised some concerns about the government's capacity to detain Iranian regime officials.
Thank you, Michelle. One of the interesting revelations today is while we're trying to keep Canadians safe and make sure that the people that are in the community that are under deportation orders actually get deported, we found out today that and it has been confirmed that the capacity of CBSA to detain people that are slotted to leave the country has been drastically reduced across the country. So we have lesser capacity today than we did a few months ago to ensure that the people that are actually ordered to be deported stay in a capacity situation or a detained situation prior to deportation, and that's not happening. We also confirmed today that many of these people that are awaiting deportation are being released back into the community.
And now my colleagues, Costas Menegakis as well as Vincent are going to speak about the impact that this has on Persian Canadians within their communities.
Good afternoon, everyone. For 47 years, the oppressive Iranian regime has perpetrated terror on its own people. Sadly, some of those people perpetrating that terror have found their way into our communities here in Canada. Richmond Hill is the home of the largest Iranian Canadian community in the country. What we see and what we hear from people in the community is that they're constantly looking over their backs in their community because these operatives, these IRGC operatives, are in our communities. Today at committee, we asked for the release of names once we know who they are, specifically as my colleague Michelle Rempel Garner just said. Case on February the 6th where the IRB decided not to release the name of a known IRGC operative in our community. People in the community are living in fear. We see that, we hear the chants. As recently as just a few days ago, hundreds of thousands of people have demonstrated on the streets of Richmond Hill. I think it's incumbent on the government to act and to act now. The last 10 years, we've had 7 immigration ministers. None of them have done this. The lax policies have allowed people to come into the country. Unfortunately, they're in the communities and they're continuing their ways, things they knew worked for them back in Iran here, where people are living in fear. Canadians should be feel safe in the communities in which they live. And I will close with this. At no time should a non-citizen with ties to a terrorist organization recognized by the government of Canada and other countries around the world be allowed to stay and live in our communities, to be around our families, our wives, our children, our mothers, our grandfathers, in our communities, in our community centers, in the malls, on our streets, in our parks. These people have to leave the country. The position of our government is, of our party, is we find them, we know who they are, they should be deported and leave the country. Thank you.
After years of liberal open border policies, we now have hundreds and hundreds of regime agents roaming on our streets here in Canada. They are terrorizing our communities. They are intimidating journalists. They are threatening business owners and silencing activists. And the people in my riding of Richmond Hill are experiencing this. They're living in fear. They tell me they are afraid. They tell me that they're frustrated at how little this Liberal government is doing to protect Canadians and expel these regime agents. At committee today, we asked whether or not the government officials were aware that senior-ranking Iranian regime officials were in fact removed after deportation orders were issued years ago, and they were not able to provide an answer as to whether they are removed. They were also not able to provide a reason as to why they have not been removed. Canadians deserve safety here on Canadian soil, here at home. Mark Carney promised that he can manage crises, but he's proving to be just like the last Liberal Prime Minister. Canadians deserve better.
Thank you. So in closing, look, there's a lot of debate today about the war in Iran, but I'll just close with 2 things. There are things that the government could be doing today, that the Liberal government could be doing today to keep Canadians safe and ensure that those who have either perpetuated human rights abuses or who are senior officials with the Iranian regimes are not allowed to stay in Canada. So that's something that the government could be doing essentially with the stroke of a pen today. But certainly the testimony that we heard from government officials at committee today did not, putting it mildly, inspire confidence that they are either doing that right now or that they are even willing to do so. So that's why we have put this motion forward, or we have given notice of this motion at committee. And the other thing I would just say is this. I think that this is consistent with the government's ever-changing and Prime Minister Carney's ever-changing position on Iran. But what we're trying to do as conservatives, who are not just opposing government flip-flops and policies, but also proposing constructive policies, is put forward common sense solutions that will keep Canadians safe. Thank you.
2 weeks ago, there was a vote on your motion about healthcare for asylum seekers. 7 of your colleagues missed the vote. You're the only party for which not everyone was there. How do you explain that?
Our party's position is that federal social welfare benefits should that the government should be reviewing all of those benefits to ensure that they're not creating incentives for people to abuse the system, and that people who have been found to have asylum claims that are either fraudulent or not valid should not have access to better health care benefits than Canadians.
7 of your colleagues not voting.
Well, I think that there's always folks that from every political party that miss all sorts of manners of votes. I would just say this. Yes, but I just gave you the position of our party. Thank you.
Just on the IRGC, and I apologize because I didn't watch committee this morning, so maybe I'm asking and answering.
Stephanie.
I know. Is my understanding right now that the government has an administrative deferral on removals to Iran? So even if they were going to deport, presuming these folks have Iranian citizenship, they can't send them back there?
That's right. So that's why in our motion we've asked for a carve-out to exempt those who have been found to have senior ties to the regime from the principle of non-refoulement.
Okay. So, but barring that, should they be detained? Like, if we can't physically send them back to a war zone, what's the answer?
Well, I think that's a great question for the government, right? And what we saw today was a lot of confusion and lack of answers from the head of the IRB. Like, we asked a basic question, which is, very high-profile case, the February 6th Global News story, Stuart Bell reporting that there was a senior Iranian official, as identified by the CBSA, who had their name withheld due to a request from their lawyer. She said, I don't know who that is. And then went on to, a very garbled and incoherent answer on, she couldn't answer why it was in the public interest to do so. So, I would just say this, our motion that we've given notice on today is the start of our prosecution of this issue with the government, and given the tensions that are happening internationally, and I think a desire from Canadians across the country to see people safe in their homes, that the government needs to answer this. So we're going to continue to put pressure on them to do so.
And is there a crossover here, or any thought on your guys' part about taking this up with public safety? Like, in the context of, there have been concerns raised globally that IRGC will act.
Absolutely. Like my colleagues, Vincent and Costas talked about the impact that this has on the communities, the diaspora communities in their own riding. Of course, this is a public safety issue, right? And the reality is that CBSA has, they've asked for deportation orders given the ties that these folks have to the regime. So of course, the government should be applying the full extent of the law to remove folks under the terrorist listing and designation, but also where there's gaps in processes, and we're clearly seeing that. Like, the fact that they only have removed one person, there's process gaps here, right? And I also think that given, the IRB testimony was pretty bad. It did not inspire confidence that they understood what the public interest was. There needs to be some revisitation of the law and perhaps clarity given to that, so that there is clear direction that when somebody is a regime-affiliated senior official, like, for example, there was, I believe, somebody who was a senior propagandist, held senior positions in the government, but was able to stay deportation orders, ordering a bit of a loophole. I think it's problematic.
Thoughts on the government's position on Iran, and especially that initial statement that showed support for the U.S. and the Israel strikes?
Right. Well, the Prime Minister has now provided 3 iterations of his position on Iran. When I first heard that the Prime Minister supported the United States in their attack military attack in that way, it was really shocking to me because Canada's role has always been standing up for the rule of law, and that to me is contrary to the rule of law. I think all agree that the regime in Iran is one that we would not align with in terms of our values, but working through all of that, is military attack the answer? And I think Canadians would stand on the side of diplomacy and pushing peace. And at the end of the day, changes that needs to happen needs to come from the people that are there, Iranians that are there, and not necessarily, I think, through a military attack. So that was very disturbing to me with the Prime Minister's statement. Then later on, perhaps with some reflection, he issued a second statement indicating regret that he supported the United States stance with regret. So my question to the Prime Minister then, does he stand with the rule of law? International law, where does Canada stand? Where does the Prime Minister stand with international law and the rule of law? And then lastly, the latest statement that the Prime Minister has issued left me thinking, where exactly are we? What is Canada's position? You know, should our first priority not be thinking about how to get the Canadians that are over there to safety, thinking about what is our alternate plan? We don't have consular support there. We don't have people there. But instead, they're talking about military involvement. That's getting Canada more engaged into the war, as opposed to taking a diplomatic approach, as opposed to standing where we've always stood in the past and is trying to broker peace.
So given all that, are you disappointed that the Prime Minister won't be at the debate this evening, or is not expected to be at the debate this evening?
The Prime Minister is the head of state here for Canada, and his words matter. So this is a take note debate initiated by the Liberal government. Why isn't he taking part in this debate? He has spoken on this issue extensively with changing positions now on the record. I think many Canadians do not know where we stand in terms of our view on this matter. He needs to provide clarity, and he should take part in this debate.
Just on another note, for the NDP leadership race, are you planning on endorsing anyone?
No, I won't be endorsing anyone as the caucus chair. I feel that it's best if I stayed neutral.
What do you think about the possibility of the Liberals getting a majority government through 3 by-elections that will take place in April?
The by-elections are necessary, and it will happen as they should. And of course, we also noted that there have been floor crossers for the Liberals as well from the Conservatives. I still remember back in the day when there were floor crossers and how different parties, depending on which part of the receiving end they're in, condemned these actions. At the end of the day, we live in a democracy, and the people should have their say. What the NDP has always stood firmly on is that if you intend to cross the floor, you need to be elected by the people with that party, and not. And so, therefore, you should sit as an independent until an election is called.
Do you think an election should come soon?
The election will come when it comes, and so the issue here, of course, before us, for those who are crossing the floor, they haven't sought the view of their electorate, of their constituents, with a democratic vote. So they have a choice to actually sit as an independent, at this time. But they chose not to, and that's the cross that they have to bear when they face the election. As did Emerson, by the way, who crossed the floor without sitting as an independent, without going to the electorate, and then he lost the election to Don Davies. Thank you.
I know you're on the phone.
Narrative from the government on the war in Iran.
I don't have an explanation for anything. All I'm saying is that the war in Iran is a difficult situation, and I think the Prime Minister needs to be responsive every day. I think he is being responsive.
But constituents might not know where the government stands on this.
The Prime Minister is pretty clear. We weren't consulted. We haven't been consulted. We have no intention of participating.
Do you feel like the message is clear to your constituents where the government stands?
I think the entire situation right now is confusing for everyone, right? Not the statement, but in terms of what is happening on the ground. I think the reality is that it's tragic, the loss of life that is happening. I mean, this is, in my view, something that perhaps could have been prevented. Prime Minister's talked about the important need for diplomacy, the important need for trying to find peaceful solutions to resolutions, and I think that's what we should all be focused on.
Is it going to be hard to Iran? Do you think it sends a confusing message to your constituents?
I condemn this killing of the innocent civilians, and I think this is not the way to go like on a war. The best way is about having negotiations, diplomacy, because we have seen the loss of so many innocent lives in Gaza, and I represent a huge Lebanese community, and whole week I've been just working on so many family members they have there. So I think diplomacy and dialogue is the best way to go on that.
So are you disappointed then that the Prime Minister said he supports the war?
There's been a G7 finance ministers meeting, and I believe the G7 finance ministers are advising not to dip into emergency oil reserves to deal with the Straits of Hormuz and the Iran business.
I don't think that, I would refer you to the statement that was published by the G7. I think it is published by now. Yeah. I can tell you, I was attending the meeting. Actually, Canada made a great contribution because we're an energy producer, so the voice of Canada really matters within the G7. What you saw during the meeting, and you will see in the statement, is a unity with respect to maintaining the trade channels, obviously, and secondly, to look at what we could do to coordinate our approach with respect to strategic petroleum reserves. I mean, that was the outcome of that meeting. But I'll let, the statement is pretty clear on that. There will be further consultation. As you know, there is a plan for a energy minister G7 meeting to take place. But I can tell you, people were very aligned on the call. Everyone wants to work together. We had a presentation from the Director General of the International Energy Agency, from the International Monetary Fund. We're following the situation very carefully with respect to markets, with respect to supplies, with respect to stock, and also working, obviously, with our American partners.
And my follow-up, and that's basically it, is how will your government respond to soaring oil prices? We're seeing it,
It's very volatile. I mean, what we're all ensuring is that there would be a sufficient stock, obviously, to meet the demand. As you know, there's stock of oil on water, as they call it. There is also discussion with respect to removing the choke point on the Strait of Hormuz. But what should reassure markets, should bring confidence, and should reestablish certainty is that G7 is united, committed to work together, monitoring, like you said, the market, monitoring the stock of oil and LNG, and ensuring that we are coordinated in our approach. That was really the outcome of this morning.
And do we have any strategic oil reserves to help release to help the price?
Well, Canada, we announced Bay du Nord recently, which is good news. We also, as you know, advancing discussion with respect to LNG Canada too. I think what it shows to the world is that Canada is an energy superpower, but also if you want to improve resilience, a country like Canada, which provides stability, predictability, rule of law, and also because of our geographical location, I can tell you our Asian partners are very keen to see Canada playing a bigger role on the international stage, because on the energy side, because people understand that energy security, economic security, and national security all come in one, and this is we see a prime example of that now. But I think that's why Canada has a big voice around the table when it comes to energy security. Merci tout le monde. Merci.